everyone. Before I get started, I recognize some of the names on the participant list, but I don't recognize everybody. So I will do a little introduction to myself. I'm Angela Hodgson. I'm a professor of practice in the Department of Biological Sciences. I have been at NDSU for 12 years now. I teach in a large variety of contexts. I do everything from managing the intro bio labs, where we have 500 students in 24 sections of lab, and I teach the TAs how to teach the labs, I used to teach 400 students at a time in Gate City Auditorium. I haven't done that in a few years. Now I mostly teach in the active learning classrooms in the AG Hill building. Again, teaching our intro bio sequence, where we have about 135 students in a class, and also teaching upper division course-based undergraduate research experiences. So give you a little bit of background of the context that I come from. And I'm really excited to talk to you about this topic today. Again, just in case there's anybody that has just joined us, I'm going to one more time. I've just posted a link again in the chat to a document of resources that I've used to assemble this talk, and other things that I think are important that I wanted to share with people about this topic of teaching with empathy. So, teaching with empathy, not sympathy, for inclusion and equity. And I'm going to start out my talk by actually focusing on the last part of this title, the inclusion and equity piece, just for a second. So inclusive and equitable teaching provides opportunity for success for students from all identities. These evidence-based teaching guides that are put forth by one of the societies, the American Society of Cell Biology hosts this site, but it's really kind of the premier site for people doing educational research in biology. But each of these teaching guides is not specifically biology focused. So if any of these look interesting to you, I'd really suggest that you check them out if you're interested in learning more about how to implement group work or peer instruction, or modeling in the classroom. I think Jenny Mumpson is participating with us, and she was instrumental in putting the modeling in the classroom together too. But I'm going to focus on the inclusive teaching, and just to, when you do click on one of these links, it's really a choose your own adventure kind of self-study, where it's a map that leads you through different categories under each of these topics, and you can click on them, you can learn a little bit more, and then it will give you more links to research on each of these topics. You can kind of start your own self-study in these areas. So back to empathy though. So empathy, the first thing, the point that I want to make is empathy is not sympathy. So a lot of times when I have casual conversations about this topic with some faculty, they'll say, but my class has to be rigorous. You know, I can't do this empathy thing because I've got to teach all this content, and it's got to be hard, or my students aren't going to be successful. And what I think is happening there is sometimes people confuse these words between empathy and sympathy. So sympathy is our feelings of pity or sorrow for someone else's misfortune, versus empathy, the way of connecting with people that shows you understand their experience, even if that you might not know exactly how they feel, because your cultural background or your experience doesn't allow you to know exactly how you feel. You have an understanding and an appreciation that they are feeling something strongly. And because of that, instructors high in teacher empathy do not lower their standards. Instructors that have sympathy or feel sorry for their students might have the feeling that they need to lower their standards or let some students buy more easily because, you know, they've had a hard life or that sort of thing. And that's not what empathy is, and that's not what we're advocating here. We do not want to lower standards, but we want to identify and remove obstacles of learning. That's what an empathetic teacher does. And so I'd like to again, kind of open this to a little bit of conversation here. So I'd like this removing obstacles of learning, what are the obstacles of learning? So if people could maybe we'll take a minute here and type in the chat, have you experienced any obstacles to learning for your students in your particular classrooms? I would like to open it up and see if I can get a few ideas. So if you wanted to type a quick phrase or sentence in the chat, what types of obstacles to learning do our students experience in our classes? I see some work, having to work, lack of resources, balancing time and work, study and prep. Lots of work, distracting by unemployment. It looks like a lot of us have had those conversations with our students. Not understanding Blackboard, yep. So technological obstacles, maybe not having good access to technology. And I'd like to stress mental health issues, great. A couple other things I'd like to have you just kind of keep in the back of your mind too, that may not be as tangible obstacles, but also things like imposter syndrome and stereotype threat too. So kind of keep those in the back of your mind as we're kind of going through and thinking about how to be empathetic with our students. All right, so in preparing this talk, in addition to reviewing what I learned in my deep teaching residency with Brian Dewsbury, I also spent some time just going back through the literature, back through Google, reading blogs, trying to read as much as I could in the amount of time I had to prepare for this talk about what do people suggest about empathy in the classroom. And there were these three themes that kept coming up over and over and over. And so those are what I would like to focus on now for the rest of our time here. So to create a more empathetic classroom, I advocate for providing opportunities to really get to know your students, adopting a growth mindset, and designing course policies that reflect a deep understanding of students' personal and social situations. So what do those look like? So first one, again, just to remind us, empathy is a process of connecting with people. And to really get students comfortable connecting with you, I advocate that you need to reach out and try to connect with them and give them an example of how you would like to share information and background in your particular classroom. So to connect with your students, first share something about yourself. I have created something called a reflexivity statement, and this is a word I just learned in the last year. And those of you in social sciences, it comes from social sciences about in the context of social science research, you want to do a self-assessment of your views and positions and how that might affect your research. And I want to apply it to teaching. We all bring views and we all bring positions. And again, this is that self-awareness piece. How is that affecting what you do and how you present yourself in the classroom? And another thing, don't be afraid to share a vulnerability. There are research that shows the more that we are open to sharing our vulnerabilities, the more students are comfortable in realizing that it's all right to have vulnerabilities and struggles. So now this is a lot of words, but I just wanted to give you an example. I'm just going to give you a minute or two to read this reflexivity statement that I've put together about how my personal background affects how I approach the classroom. right, so I'm gonna go on to the next slide. I probably could not have read that in that amount of time because as you see in there, I admit that I'm a slow reader. But I try to be very open with my students, again, about some of my background, about some of my history, about who I am. And then I reach out to my students to try to learn something about them. And so this is something that is not very time consuming. You can do at the beginning of the semester, and it really opens that line of communication with your students and leads to greater understanding. So there's a few ways that you can learn about your students. I've deployed a student survey before where you could do this in Blackboard. You can ask a series of questions. What's their hobbies? Where are they from? What do they like to do in their spare time? One thing that I always make sure that I ask though are, do you foresee any challenges that could affect your learning in the upcoming semester? And since I started doing this, this has been one of the most powerful things that I have done in really getting to know what kind of obstacles students may be bringing to my classroom. Brian Dewsbury does a This I Believe essay after the very popular NPR segment. There's a link to that in the resources I gave you, or you could ask your students to model your reflexivity statement and try to write their own. So going on to the next one, first here, we often, when we're frustrated with students, often I will hear this when faculty gather, they'll be like, but students aren't like they used to be. You know, I just can't teach this group of students. And yes, students aren't like they used to be. And this is one of the things that we have to acknowledge as teachers in the 21st century, is that the diversity of students coming to our classrooms is greater than it's ever been, for the good and not the bad. But we have more students from lower and middle incomes enrolling in college, and we just have more students overall. Instead of getting the top 30 or 40% of each high school class, we're getting 70% of each high school class. And with that is going to be more students with more diverse backgrounds and potentially more obstacles coming into our classrooms, and we need to acknowledge that. And we need to ask ourselves is, do we have growth mindset for our students? Do we really believe that all students can learn anything that they want to learn? Or do we look at our students and say, oh, you know, 50% of these aren't going to exceed in my course because of what they bring to my classroom? Brian Dewsbury talks about this as your chance at birth. Are you going to have a classroom that allows any student, no matter if they came from an under-resourced school, they came from a small school, they didn't reach their full potential in high school, are you going to have a classroom that allows all those students to succeed, or only those students that come in are the best prepared? And again, this is my philosophy on this. This is the last paragraph on my reflexivity statement about how I believe that all students who are willing to persevere, are willing to work hard, are willing to ask questions and be engaged in the material are going to succeed in my classroom. So, which comes to the third point about having empathy in your classroom, is designing course policies that reflect a deep understanding of students' personal and social situations. So I'm going to pose a situation that we've all had. Why would a student not hand in their homework or do poorly on an assignment or an exam? When I first started teaching, my go-to answer was this: they must have spent all night partying with their friends and just, you know, don't care about this class, and they are not going to succeed because they're not trying. Could there be other reasons, though, if you step back and reflect on this, that the students aren't handing in their homework or doing poorly on an exam? So again, I'd like to, keep going ahead here, showing you that. I'd like to hear from you. Are there any other situations that you have encountered, or any other reasons other than the one I have here, that students may not have handed that last homework assignment in? So again, if you have some thoughts, sick parent, don't have time to study, any others that people have encountered? Health issues, family problems, test anxiety, daycare provider. Yeah. You guys are great. Yeah. So over 12 years, I have learned that yes, there are a multitude of reasons why students might not be handing in their homework. It might have nothing to do with partying, and it might have nothing to do with that they didn't care. And these just quickly are just some reasons that I've heard in the last couple of years that run the gamut from, illness of themselves or their parents or people they care for, responsibilities at home, issues related to coming from a farming family and the requirements for having to help out on the farm. It goes on, the list can go on and on. So teaching with empathy is taking a deep breath, acknowledging that, I just wish that they would have done their homework. They could have done so much better, acknowledging you have those feelings, and thinking about what is behind the student's behavior. Because these behaviors are usually a result of what is happening in their life, and they're usually not directed at you. So the last thing then I'll talk about is course policies that I've adopted where I try to show students that I understand their busy, complicated lives, and that I may not understand all of it, but I'm empathetic for it. So one of the things I hear most often from students is, you don't post things soon enough. I really need 5 to 7 days because of all the other things I have going on in my life to get the notes printed out or to do an assignment. So I make an effort to, if I'm going to give an assignment, it's posted 5 to 7 days before it's due. And if I miss that deadline, I cancel that assignment. Thinking about flexible deadline policies. I would not advocate for not having deadlines. I've tried that. It doesn't work. Students also need structure, but thinking about, are there ways that you can give all your students, some people do this with tokens. They give them 1 to 3 tokens at the beginning of the classroom in the class periods that they can use for a 48-hour extension on any assignment. And then the last thing that I do is I've started to allow students to retake tests. And so again, this is focused on having that growth mindset that not everybody, especially coming into an introductory class, their freshman year is going to do well on that first test or even that second test, but can, if given the opportunity and a chance to retry things, can they show growth over the semester? So I will leave it at there. Those are my 3 points: having a growth mindset, really getting to know your students, and thinking about empathetic course policies. And again, there's lots of other resources on the document I posted, but I'd like to see if there's any questions in the last few minutes that we might have here. One slide. Or if there, I'd also like to hear if there are any comments on people that, on other classroom practices that people might have tried to show this understanding for student experiences, or comments or thoughts on some of these I have posted on the slide here. Okay. See a few questions coming in there. So one question is about if they're allowed to resubmit work, they may not try as hard on the first draft. They're hoping to get feedback to respond to. Thinking about this in a couple of different ways. One, on my tests, if you look at the document I posted and what I have my students do for being allowed to retake tests, there is extra work they have to put in order to earn that right to retake the test. So often I've found that that's enough to get them to really focus on the first attempt if they have that ability. And because they don't want to have to go through the extra work needed to be eligible to take the second test. But for those students who maybe that week they were required to work 3 12-hour shifts at the hospital and really couldn't put in the work needed for that first test, it does give them that opportunity to show that maybe given a little bit more time, they can put in that work for the second opportunity. It looks like we're closing in a few minutes here.
Now there is one more question, but I know the breakout room is going to close probably any second.